The class stood cautiously, tails flitting around nervously and ears moving around to catch any odd noise, as they waited for instruction from their teachers, Mr. Maru, their slightly insane chemistry teacher, as well as his wife, Mrs. Maru. Their slightly more crazy English teacher were very, very carefully handling a number of strange objects and unusual devices. From odd spheres with strange levers to long sticks with bright colours, and some objects that the students did recognise as fireworks rockets. Mr. Maru also served as the school's substitute gym teacher, so was smart as a tack, but built like a tank. His appearance was always intimidating, but Mrs. Maru was a dainty, sweet creature with a bubbly voice. Some girls idly wondered how these two polar opposites got along well enough to marry. Each girl here had the same body type, human but with cat ears, a tail, patches of short fluffy fur in places, and stark cat eyes. You would mistake them for cosplayers at a convention, if you didn't know the history behind them. This was also one of the first ever all Beast King classes too. Each girl had a different fur pattern, similar to common Earth cats, like Calico, Coon, and Shorthair.
Okay then, ladies. Welcome to your extracurricular activities class. You will earn extra credit towards your class grades and also have a bit of fun too.
Mr. Maru spoke loudly to the crowd of 25 Catgirls, still fresh from the academy and still juniors. Most of the girls perked up, with some of them still terrified of their new hosts, but knew better than to question their teachers. The only non-cat girl in the audience was a dark elven woman, who stood quietly nearby acting as a chaperone for the class. Tails nervously wrapped around legs or waistlines, with some girls having their tails intertwined with their friends or trusted partners. They knew their teachers would never willingly put them in danger, but the objects on the table in front of them made them nervous. Before we begin, ladies, everyone, and I mean everyone, has to put these headphones on. These are ear protectors. We made sure to get some made specially for all of you. Now come on, quickly now. Put them on and do not take them off until we tell you to. Mrs. Maru bellowed, presenting a set of headphones made specially for them. Each student obeyed immediately and put the set of headphones on. The cat ear motif each set had was more than just decoration as it turned out, and actually fit each girl's ears perfectly. Even the elven woman came over and put on her respective set of noise protectors, then returned to her position nearby. Today is going to be a short lesson on the identification, use, and safe disposal of explosives, Mrs. Maru said excitedly. The crowd gasped in shock. Explosives? Bombs? Is that what all those objects were?
Don't be scared. Everyone has to do this. All the elves, beastmen, and other classmates, especially the other humans, had to do it too. And don't worry, almost everything here is just for show. Now, first question. Who can tell me what an explosive is? Mr. Maru asked.
The girl stood nervously for a minute before one student finally raised a hand. It's like a chemical reaction, right?
Correct! Not quite as much detail as I wanted, but close enough. An explosive is a chemical reaction which releases a large amount of energy in a short time. This, he said, and picked up an odd pineapple-looking object, is called a grenade. And this, he said, picking up a block of wood, is a block of wood. What, if any, is the correlation here? He asked.
They all looked at each other. One of the smarter students raised a hand. They have energy?
Yes, well done. It's all the same principle. Wood releases this energy when it burns, but it does so very slowly. This grenade releases its energy very, very fast. If you collected a bunch of these logs and made them release their energy very, very fast, you would have a grenade. An explosion is simply a release of energy, same as burning a pile of wood, only very, very fast, he said, alternating between showing off a nearby pile of wood and brandishing the grenade. He used some kind of mechanism that split the grenade in half, showing off his innards. He beckoned the girls to come closer to take a look at his insides, and they did eventually. This is a fragmentation grenade. Looking at his insides, how do you think it works?
Like, make lots of pieces? Like a window shattering? One girl asked.
Correct! The fragmentation grenade has a slightly thicker shell that contains the explosive. The purpose is to shatter the casing so the fragments of the grenade do most of the damage when it explodes. Hence the term frag grenade. Yes, it is indeed as nasty as it sounds. Now, observe, Mr. Murray said.
He moved to a nearby box and procured another grenade.
Fire in the hole,
he yelled out, and then pulled the pin on the device. With the practiced hand of a football star, he tossed the thing into the sandpit nearby. The explosion was small but pronounced. The students were not expecting the detonation and subsequent puff of sand and dust as a result. The crater had become ever so slightly larger as a result, and their cat eyes could clearly see the pot-marked mini-craters made by the shrapnel. The whole situation suddenly made them all very, very nervous, as ears suddenly laid flat, and tails nervously wrapped around waists. The terror of the situation really overtook them, when they suddenly noticed that the world in front of them had fractured reality, and now had what appeared to be shattered glass on it.
And this,
Mr. Murray said, as he pointed towards the apparent broken glass in front of them,
is why we have a ballistic shield. You genuinely don't have to worry. We aren't stupid. So there, ladies, is your first lesson when it comes to explosives of any kind, from military-grade demolitions charges to common household fireworks. Safety is an absolute that is non-negotiable,
Mr. Murray bellowed, loudly to make sure everyone heard. The students just shivered in response and nodded slowly. Mrs. Marrow took the stage now and lifted a sheet off a table. The table contained various devices, common household fireworks, military C4 charges, and various ancient or current-day things like shells, grenades, rockets, and other stuff. All of it was of course fake, made of plastic or aluminium, and made into cutaways and cross-sections so one could see its innards. Some looked less like explosives and more like very big bullets. Now, a very important question. Why exactly are we here, learning about things that go boom? Why exactly is this exercise a part of your school curriculum? She asked. The students glanced at each other, still in their defensive postures with ears back and tails wrapped. Eventually, one girl, a tabby named Kimberly, finally spoke up. Is it like a history lesson or something? Well, yes, but more than that. It's for a number of reasons, but the three main ones are simple. History, safety, and fun. The history part is simple. We humans, shortly before we encountered your world, were actively engaged in a number of wars, military exercises, weapons tests, and technology tests. As a consequence, we have left a fair bit of unexploded ordnance almost everywhere. This is where the safety part comes in. How to identify certain munitions, and how to make sure when you call authorities, you can effectively tell them what they are dealing with. And then, they can use that information to fix the problem fast, safely, and effectively. She calmly explained. All the students collectively made an "oh" of sudden realization, and some even relaxed slightly. Some of them, at least. The prospect of so many bombs lying around scared most girls still. The concept of humans so busily engaged in such dangerous activity, more so. But curiosity eventually overcame their caution, and they approached the table to look at all the bombs. Artillery shells, fragmentation bombs, landmines, mining dynamite, coring charges, tank shells, rockets of all types, and commonly used grenades, including my personal favourite, the Thermite grenade. Now, looking at this thing, who can tell me how it works? Mrs. Marrow asked her students. She brandished the mock-up variant of a Thermite grenade, a large stick with a thick cylindrical head, covered in spikes. The girls each took some time to study the device, taking it and examining the cutaway. One girl, a calico called Amari, spoke up. I don't remember what Thermite is, but this thing here... She pointed to a ring on the underside of the handle. Is the pin. If I read this correctly, this thing is also magnetic, so it sticks to metal surfaces. So presumably you pull the pin, yeet it at what you want to go boom, it sticks, and then boom. Excellent, but not quite boom. Thermite, you see, is a different kind of beast, used primarily against tanks or armoured targets. That's true. But this doesn't go boom, it goes melt, she replied, with a strangely frightening smirk. How? It is a complicated but extremely effective chemical reaction. Thermite is a mixture of finely powdered aluminium and iron oxide that produces a very high temperature on combustion, used in welding and for incendiary bombs. Essentially, it's a fire grenade used against tanks. It produces such stupidly high temperatures, it melts through armor plating. A good or lucky throw, and this thing can melt through the plating on a tank, right above the ammo storage. Then comes the boom, Mrs. Maru said with a chuckle. Meep, several girls said at once, echoing the sentiment of fear. They had no time to consider anything, however, as the lesson continued, as Mrs. Maru held aloft a small cannonball, one of the ancient ones. This one, however, the girls were actually familiar with. Considering the world you came from, you probably know what this is. Cannonball. This particular unit is an explosive, a hollow shell filled with gunpowder. The students all glanced at each other, and a look of confusion overcame them. Wait, you have cannons? I thought you just had those big laser things, one girl asked. All three adults laughed at that statement. Of course we have a cannon. Giant starship laser guns are simply another version of a cannon, only very, very fancy. If given enough time, your world may have developed these guns too, so you know. It's all about finding an edge above your competition or opponent, Mrs. Maru said.
Think about it. You have a cannon, right? Guy who's using it is like, I wonder how I can make this shoot faster. Then he figures out how to pre-package gunpowder sacks that can just be shoved in. No measuring, no correcting. Sack in, ball in, boom. Then the guy thinks, well that's good, but how can I make it fire further? This leads to smaller, stronger cannons with longer barrels that hold pressure for slightly longer, and therefore yeet the shell further. It's all just about getting better. Eventually you would have gone from this to this, Mr. Maru said, as he held up a cannonball, then an artillery shell. One girl raised a hand. How long did it take you to get from cannonball to artillery shell? Oh, several centuries. We were using artillery. The first recorded use of gunpowder mortars was in the 14th century. For reference's sake, it is currently the 25th century. The concept of the shell. The first true explosive shells were used in the late 17th century, but they became more common in the 19th century, particularly during the Napoleonic Wars, 1803 to 1815. The development of reliable fuses allowed these shells to detonate at the desired moment, increasing their effectiveness. The concept of this big bullet thing, a brass casing plus an explosive tip, arrived roughly around the late 19th century. It came to first full-scale use during the First World War in the 20th century, Mr. Maru said, gesturing to various devices on the table display. One girl, the oldest of the group, who had the fur pattern similar to a Maine Coon, raised her hand. So, does that mean if the cataclysm didn't happen, we would have been able to have those big laser cannon things too? Eventually, yes. Magic doesn't have nearly the same effectiveness in space, so you likely would have had to go a similar route to us. But you don't need to speculate too much because that is already happening. In any case, on with the lesson. Someone asked about thermite. Would you like a demonstration? Mr. Maru said, again making the students uncomfortable with that strange smirk. The students once again nervously glanced at each other. Excellent! Get behind the ballistic glass and stay there. No exceptions. Mr. Maru moved away and retrieved a secured metal box from nearby, as well as a bag of popcorn and 2 empty plant pots. He used a sort of metal pole and hoop system, hanging one pot above the other. He filled the top pot with a odd, very fine powdered grey substance, and the bottom pot with popcorn kernels. He also put in the lower pot an odd, brightly coloured cylinder of some kind, buried under the popcorn. He messed around with the top pot for a bit longer, placing some other things they couldn't identify in the top pot, then lit a fuse. Fire in the hole! He bellowed loudly, then ran for cover as the fuse burned. The fuse hit the powder, and a huge billowing flame suddenly appeared, as well as a strange loud hissing, fizzing noise as the powder caught on fire. Within seconds, the pot was in full blaze, the temperature so hot, so viciously hot, that it was starting to melt the ceramic pot. The smoke from it billowed out, an angry cloud of black and grey, filling the air with the smell of rust. Then the pot burned through.
A sudden flow of what appeared to be sparking, flaming, molten lava came out of the bottom of the top pot. A mixture of spontaneous popping noises, along with the stench of burning popcorn, flooded the air. The mix of smoke became worse, stronger as the concoction burned. The popcorn mostly just caught fire, but distinct popping noises could be heard. Then, the bottom pot exploded, spreading popcorn kernels and thermite solution everywhere in a fiery, smoky display of boom. Pieces of burned, popped, or singed popcorn flew everywhere, and pockets of still burning thermite scattered around. The students now realized exactly why the ballistic shield was put there, and they carefully huddled around it. They also now knew exactly why the pots were placed 100 feet away, and why they had to squint a bit to see what was happening. The fizzing and popping eventually stopped, and Mr. Marrow walked into the area with a level of caution the girls never knew he had. If he was this careful, then they knew something was up. He stopped, listened a second or two, then hurried back behind the glass. He waited for another minute or so, then returned and headed to the pot, still cautious. He looked around, brandishing a small fire extinguisher with him, and smiled as he turned to the crowd, giving a thumbs up. "Right, it's safe. Go on. Go there," Mrs. Marrow commanded, and directed the students to go to where he was. They all gingerly wandered towards him, carefully avoiding the smouldering remnants of popcorn and melted metal. They went forward and looked into the pot as per Mr. Marrow's direction. They all gasped in shock. The bottom of the pot wasn't ceramic, but rather some kind of solid metal cylinder was put at the bottom. There was a hole straight through it. The thermite had melted straight through the metal.
And this, ladies, is thermite, which is also why you are not allowed to use it, or even have any of it, without a special pyrotechnics license. Now you get why the thermite grenade is a piece of banned military equipment. It's rather awful, isn't it? He said.
The students all nodded, shivering from the event, and slowly filtered back towards the ballistic glass. Mrs. Marrow spoke up. "Right, you now have history, you now have safety. Now for the most important part. Fun." "How is any of this fun?" one girl squealed. "Safe cracking and fireworks, of course," she yelled excitedly. She lifted a tarp covering a large cubic object, and indeed, it was a safe. It was an odd one, but still in pristine condition.
"So, this is how it works. You girls are going to read this textbook here," Mr. Marrow said, as he rounded the corner and handed them a small booklet. "And you are going to use the knowledge from it to safely break the door on this safe."
Mrs. Marrow spoke before anyone could ask why. "Why are we doing this, you ask? Simple. This will teach you how much explosives are dangerous, what explosives to avoid, what not to do, and what to actually do. It will help identify unauthorized devices, among many other things, but most of all, career path," Mrs. Marrow said. The girls' ears all perked up at once. They heard the magic word. Career.
This exercise opens you up to a huge multitude of possible career options. Mixing gunpowder is basically chemistry. That's cosmetics, fuel production, oil refining, toy making, even a track towards my personal favorite, chocolate making. And let's not forget the concept of organization. You make proper measurements and make the mathematical calculations correctly, you'll be fast-tracked to other industries, as math is a critical component of a huge number of industries. Anybody here want to fly a plane one day? Well, this will give you extra credit towards your math score. Math is critical to acquiring a pilot's license, Mr. Marrow explained.
The girls' eyes sparkled. Suddenly they understood what all this loud, boomy nonsense was about. "And finally, this will give you the chance to learn how to have a bit of stupid fun on your days off, without any risk of blown limbs, scorched fur, or anything. It isn't just a lesson, it's a fun lesson. Now, I don't want your teachers to know, but I put a special surprise in the lockbox that's locked in the safe. There's one for each of you, and if you get the safe open, they're all yours," Mrs. Marrow said with a wink.
"Babe, what have you been up to?"
Mr. Marrow asked, giving his wife a side glance. "Don't worry about it, hon. It's all above board. Now, please carry on," Mrs. Marrow said, giving her husband a very knowing wink and smile, a combination that all the girls easily recognized from watching interactions between their own parents. Mr. Marrow continued with the lesson. The girls read through the textbook, carefully considering everything. They were made to not use calculators and to turn their phones off, doing the calculations using paper and pencil. One girl, however, had concerns. She raised her hand, a cute British short hair with a pink butterfly pin in her hair. Isn't this kind of illegal? You were teaching us how to break a safe open after all. Nah, this safe is a 19th century replica. The safes we have these days are so much better than this one. A little boom boom is not going to do much to a modern master key ultralock safe. This is carbon steel. Modern safes are military-grade titanium. Besides, availability of explosives and modern crime techniques, you won't have the chance anyway. This is more for fun, Mrs. Marrow replied. The students shrugged and carried on. Mr. Marrow answered any questions they had as they carefully inspected the booklet. Mr. Marrow then handed them a table full of the raw ingredients to make the necessary gunpowder, and made them calculate everything needed to get the mixture correct. Mr. Marrow had to intervene only once when too much sulfur was added to the mixture. He removed it and disposed of it properly before allowing them to continue. Eventually they made the proper mixture needed, and Mrs. Marrow checked their notes and calculations like she was supposed to. Everything was to standard. Mr. Marrow then took a small spoonful of the concoction they made and tested it. It was indeed a proper mixture and ready for use. Mr. Marrow showed the students how to wrap a measurement of gunpowder and set a fuse in it to create a grenade of sorts. He was more experienced, so for him it was flawless. The fuses used were also more advanced than previous generations, using a small wire and hand spark generator with a safety catch for the detonator. Mr. Marrow moved the hefty safe to a safe distance. He was the one who did the arming and placing rather than any of the students for obvious reasons, following their instructions to actually place it. Their first attempt was to use a piece of duct tape to hold it up by a string, placing the explosive next to a door hinge. Mr. Marrow took his time and did everything properly. Then, once he was secure and everything was done correctly, he double, triple, then rechecked his setup. Then moved behind the glass. He checked the wire, the fuse, and spark generator. Then, once satisfied, handed it to one of the girls. Mr. Marrow, how exactly do you know how to do this? One girl asked.
Former SMC Navy Bomb Squad technician. I wasn't always a teacher, he said with a smile, and readied the explosive.
Okay, how did... Oh, fire in the hole, she bellowed, then looked at him. Right?
Absolutely correct. Well done. Glad to see you're paying attention, he replied with a smile.
She followed instructions and released the safety mechanism, then pulled the trigger. A small electrical generator caused an electric current to charge down the wire, towards two opposing ends inside the gunpowder charge, completing a circuit. The resulting spark caused the gunpowder to ignite and explode. The bomb made a loud bang, a puff of smoke, and mixed the sound in with the noise of a hollow metallic clang as the safe moved slightly from the detonation. Mr. Marrow held a ballistic shield in front of him as he approached the safe, holding it at an angle as he made his way close. He took a good look at it and yelled back, "Safe to go! The safe's open!" The girls all rushed in and took a look at the safe. The door hinges had been blown open and the door was barely hanging onto it. Mr. Marrow carefully pulled the safe door open and took out the lockbox. He handed it to the victorious students and they excitedly opened it. For all 30 students, paid for by the school's donors, for each girl was a shopping voucher at a nearby mall for the equivalent of $500. They all celebrated happily and jumped for joy at the sight. The elven woman from earlier approached and cleared her throat. The noise caused every girl to suddenly snap to attention and look at her. Now, ladies, I know this is something you have to be excited about, but we made this arrangement only on the condition you use that money for school supplies, textbooks, and replacement uniforms for school. Once all these items are procured, you will have roughly $100 to spend on yourself. But please, ladies, school supplies first and foremost. Are we clear? She said. Yes, Headmistress Cleary, the girls all said together. Fantastic. This has been a most enlightening experience. Can I count on you two to take them to the ball on their day off tomorrow? She asked, gesturing to the other two adults.
Sure, I'm up for it, he replied.
Excellent. Now, I'll count on you two to clean this up. I'll take these girls back to the school and wrap up for the day. Back on the bus, ladies. Make sure you secure your vouchers properly in your backpacks. I'll put them in a lockbox when we get to school and keep them safe for tomorrow. Off you go, then, Mrs. Cleary said, and each girl giggled happily as they all filed into the school bus. This was enlightening. Do you two think this can be done more often for other classes? She asked.
It's kind of pricey to do this. Safe and explosives and thermite, but I guess I can see if I can organize the suppliers once a month, Mr. Marrow said. Maybe I can ask some of my old Navy buddies to help out.
Works for me. See you two tomorrow morning, Mrs. Cleary said with a smile, and got on the bus.